In today's video, I want to discuss the William Nylander situation with the Toronto Maple Leafs. I came across a very interesting article via the Toronto Sun discussing the possibility of 8 potential trade destinations for Nylander should it come to that between he and the Maple Leafs. So I want to discuss those scenarios and see if any of them actually make sense for Toronto to actually consider. We'll discuss those coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top, today I want to discuss William Nylander and the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, as we know, he's an RFA who still remains unsigned, and we don't really have any updates to indicate that they're close. Now, throughout the offseason, as this contract stalemate has kind of gone on, there's been all kinds of rumors and speculation and talk around Nylander and the Leafs. Are they going to trade him or not? And there's been all kinds of crazy rumors floating around there as well. So I just want to caution you as well to kind of be careful what you read and what you believe out there on the internet. There's all kinds of fake Twitter accounts spreading trade rumors that don't make any sense at all. A friend of the channel here, Andrew Pillock Hockey, put out a video yesterday discussing the Nylander situation and a lot of the rumors that have been floating around. And he made a lot of good, valid points in there. I'm going to link his video down below in the description if you haven't had a chance to watch it. Once you're done here, maybe go check that out. He made a lot of good points, basically reiterating the fact that there's a lot of things that goes on in a lot of discussions with contracts that we don't fully know. We only go by what's being told by the experts and the insiders. So just be very careful on where you get your sources from. When we discuss trade rumors on this channel, I only discuss rumors from really trusted sources. There's certainly plenty of websites and Twitter accounts, etc., that you can get information from and kind of make anything up on a whim and make it sound, kind of juicy and something to talk about. But a lot of times there's nothing to it. I only really discuss trade rumors from trusted sources, like Elliot Friedman, Bob McKenzie, Darren Dreger, Chris Johnston, Spectors Hockey. There's plenty of other ones out there. There's one site called Hockey Buzz that by Eklund. I don't really put into it. I've never seen a rumor of his ever come true, so he's a bit of a hack in my opinion. There's also plenty of Twitter accounts like Rumor Break and a few others. I don't even know what they're called because I don't really pay much attention to them. But I like to spread a lot of rumors, and there's absolutely nothing to it at all. So these are not trade rumors about William Nylander. This is just an interesting article in the Toronto Sun. I'm not suggesting the Leafs are going to trade him. I don't believe they really want to. I'm sure their preference is to sign him. The belief out there, based on reports from the insiders that we can trust, is that there's still a big gap in money between Nylander and the Leafs. Until that gap is bridged and there's a contract in place, there's going to be talk and speculation. And so this was really just for conversation purposes here. If it gets to the point that the Leafs really need to consider a trade, do any of these 8 trade scenarios in this article make sense for the Leafs to kind of pursue? So that's what I want to go through here. This article comes from the Toronto Sun. I'm also going to link that down below in the description if you care to read the article and go through these trade scenarios in a little bit more detail. First team they reference here is the Arizona Coyotes. So if the Leafs were to make a deal with Arizona, they could possibly target a young defenseman like Jakob Chychrun. Now, I'm not 100% convinced that the Coyotes would prefer to trade Chychrun. At the same time, though, when you have an opportunity to acquire a forward as good as William Nylander, you do have to give up something significant as well in return. And I do think Chychrun potentially long-term could be a good help to the Leafs. And I think William Nylander could certainly be a good help to the Coyotes. So I do think it's a possibility that should it come to the fact that the Leafs maybe do consider trading him, that Arizona is a team to look to. The Coyotes do have the cap space to make it happen. But at the same time, you got to remember here that if Toronto can't come to terms with Nylander because the money is just too much and they just want to get him moved on, some of these other teams may have a very difficult time affording him as well. So it's going to be something that's really tricky to accomplish. But at the same time, the Arizona Coyotes do have some assets that I think the Leafs could covet here in a return should they go down that road in the future, with Jakob Chychrun possibly being the targeted piece here returning from the Coyotes. So let me know what you think of that. If the Leafs were to trade Nylander, do you think the Coyotes would be a good fit, and maybe Jakob Chychrun being a potential nice piece to return to the Leafs? Next up, they discussed the Carolina Hurricanes as being another team of interest. Now, it had been speculated earlier in the offseason that the Leafs and the Hurricanes did have some trade talks, not necessarily about William Nylander, but that the Leafs kind of put some feelers out and inquired about what it might take to possibly acquire a guy like Justin Falk. Now, Justin Falk's a defenseman we've talked a lot about during the offseason. There was a lot of talk, and a lot of this talk came directly from Hurricanes general manager Don Waddell that I have heard myself in interviews, indicating that he was considering trading Justin Faulk, and guys like him and Jeff Skinner, they were kind of contemplating getting a fresh start and returning some younger assets. So I do know it's a guy that they've considered moving. They do have a lot of defensemen on that roster, probably more than they need, really. They have youngsters like Hayden Fleury not getting any playing time. They got Jake Bean down in the minors. And there's more on the way as well. Trevor Van Riemsdyk hasn't been getting a lot of playing time. So they have more than enough capable defensemen in that roster. So moving a defenseman, at least one, makes a lot of sense for the Hurricanes. And obviously adding a guy like William Nylander, I think, would be a huge boost. They have a lot of young talent there he could play with. I do see a fit in that regard. I do think Justin Faulk possibly could be a help to the Leafs, but I do think the defenseman they might prefer to go after here might be a guy like Brett Pesce, who can provide some offense, but is more of a two-way solid defender. I mean, Justin Faulk can certainly help on the power play, can certainly help put up some points, but he's not as strong on the defensive side of the puck. And I don't really think the Leafs need a whole lot more when it comes to offensive D. They've already got Riley, who's leading the league, and they've got Gardner, who's potentially going to be tough to re-sign depending on how these other contracts go. So I think they need a defenseman who can kind of do a bit. I really think if the Leafs are going to target bringing in a D, it has to be somebody who's affordable and a solid two-way D. So I think Pesce is kind of the guy they should look at. But at the same time, though, the Carolina Hurricanes have more than enough capable defensemen they could consider trading. They have the cap space to sign Nylander. So I do think that if that comes to the... So I do think if the Leafs ever do make this trade, that the Carolina Hurricanes are a very viable option for the Leafs to talk to. So let me know what you think down below in the comments. Next up, they suggested possibly talking to the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, the Blue Jackets also have a very strong young defense group as well. They do have another forward of their own who appears to not be the happiest right now, and that's Josh Anderson. Josh Anderson went through a similar situation to Nylander with his contract last year. It was resolved a little bit quicker than Nylander's, but still drug on to the beginning of the season. And, as we know, things are still not great, at least it appears that way, between Anderson and the Blue Jackets. Now, we did see the fact here that it was being speculated online that maybe he would be close to asking for a trade because he seems to be demoted in the lineup, not getting as much ice time. However, Josh Anderson's agent did put out a note on Twitter over the weekend indicating that was completely untrue, that Anderson hadn't been playing well. He accepted the fact that he was demoted and was working hard to kind of get back into coach's good graces and work his way back into his original spot there. So wouldn't put a whole lot into that, but Josh Anderson's also known to have some difficult negotiations here in the past. So at some point, it wouldn't be a complete shocker if the Jackets were to move him. But I don't see that making sense for Toronto. If they do end up trading Nylander, it makes more sense to bring back some different assets like on the defensive side of the game. They've got plenty of capable forwards here to fill those spots, as we've seen so far this season without Nylander in the lineup. Columbus might look at maybe moving a guy like either David Savard, maybe a Nudavara. I don't expect them to trade guys like Seth Jones or Zach Werenski. I think those would be untouchable. But the other guys I do think would likely be available should a deal like that be made. So again, I want to hear your comments on the deal with Columbus. If the Leafs came to trading Nylander, do you see Columbus as a good trading partner, and a potential return like a Savard or a Nudavara as a starting point would make sense? Now, keep in mind some of the players we're talking about here as returns doesn't mean that would be the only piece coming back. Just that would be the main piece in any potential return for a Nylander trade here. So give me your thoughts on the potential Columbus deal. Now, of course, there's always the Edmonton Oilers. They seem to come up a lot with a lot of trade partners here. But again, they reference the Leafs and Oilers as possibly being good trade partners here for Nylander. Now, as we know, the Oilers have kind of struggled to find consistent wingers for Leon and McDavid both. And right now they have some guys that look like they could be the answers, like Ty Ratty and Kailer Yamamoto, etc., potentially Toby Reeder. But William Nylander would certainly be an upgrade on all of those guys, and he would certainly be able to keep up and play well with either a Draisaitl or McDavid and really give the Oilers an extra big boost in that forward group. So should a deal like that ever be considered, potentially the Oilers could consider moving a guy like Klefbom or even a Darnell Nurse. Personally, I think Klefbom would be the preferred player that they would want to move, and I do think under the different situation with some different defensemen to kind of mentor him, he could certainly really take his game forward. I know we've mentioned before the Oilers and Habs maybe being good trade partners. We were just having a discussion about that in the comment section the other day on the Habs video. And it's something, again, I think he could also be a good fit with Toronto. I do think the Oilers would probably prefer to keep most of their D intact right now because they could certainly use some upgrades back there more than anything rather than move one out for a forward. but I do think that this deal would kind of make sense, but I'm not sure it'd be the absolute best deal for Toronto here. The next team they bring up in this article is the Nashville Predators. Now, as we know, the Predators have another really strong defense core, and they have some guys that are going to be very difficult to keep together because of all the contracts. Now, we already seen PK Subban have a big contract. Roman Yossi's coming due soon. Ryan Ellis just got his extension this offseason. They've got Matthias Ekholm as well. And it is going to prove to be very difficult here in the short term to keep those four guys together. Now, I do think the Preds will do what they can to make sure that happens. However, it is going to be quite a challenge with their salary cap situation. Now, they do have a lot of young forwards under contract for long periods of time at really team-friendly deals, which is going to help with that. And if we see the cap rise just enough, maybe they'll be able to do it. But would the Predators consider moving a guy like Ryan Ellis for a William Nylander? I think Ryan Ellis would be a tremendous upgrade for the Leafs. I think he would be a huge help on that blue line. But I'm just not sure this deal really makes sense for Nashville. I mean, you can argue that Nylander is better than some of their other forwards, so maybe there's a deal there. They're in different conferences, which is another scenario you see arise quite often. Teams prefer to trade at a conference. But, you know, there are some aspects of this deal that would make sense. I'm just not sure that the Preds would want to give up a defenseman for yet another forward when they do have a lot of good forwards as well. So let me know what you think. I think in some ways this deal makes sense. Just not sure this, again, would be the best deal for the Predators, but I think if the Leafs came down to it, that they had to trade Nylander and this were not getting a deal done on a contract, if they could get a guy like Ryan Ellis, I think that would be an absolutely huge upgrade for the Toronto Blue Line. Now, another team that's mentioned in a lot of rumors because they're going through a bit of a transition phase here, and that's the New York Islanders. Now, the New York Islanders, obviously with Lou Lamoriello at the helm, he knows the Leaf players extremely well. So depending on what his thoughts are on the situation, he very well could covet a player like William Nylander to upgrade his top six situation with the New York Islanders. Now, one defenseman that might be of interest to the Leafs would be Ryan Pulock. He's young, he's getting himself established, and he's putting up some decent production. I think Ryan Pulock would probably be a good add to just about most teams around the league. Not sure he's really has the name value that a lot of Leaf fans are going to be looking for here, and it might be a guy who kind of flies under the radar because of where he plays. Ryan Pulock is certainly emerging to be a really strong defenseman. Now, I don't think that Pulock would be able to be traded straight up for Nylander. They'd have to put more of a piece in there, maybe some draft picks or a prospect. I don't know what it would take exactly. But again, with the history between Lou and the Leafs, knowing Nylander so well, the team going through some transition phases right now and needing some upgrades really across the roster, wouldn't be a shock that if the Leafs were seriously going down this road, that the Islanders were a team that got involved. So I do think that makes a lot of sense for the Islanders. Out of all these deals we've discussed, though, I don't really see this being the best one for the Leafs, though. So let me know what you think down below in the comments. The article then goes on to also discuss the other team in New York, the New York Rangers. Now, they have a lot of young talent as well. You know, we've seen guys like Philip Hedl and Brett Howden get their feet wet this year. You got Elias Anderson in the mix. You know, even some of their other guys like Mika Zibanejad and Jesper Fast, they're still pretty young too. So Nylander would probably fit really well in that group. But I think it's safe to say Nylander could probably fit in most teams' groups, really in the top 6 or top 9 forward group, because he's a pretty strong forward. But I think he would certainly be a good help to the Rangers as well. Now, this article goes on to mention that the Rangers would love to get rid of Kevin Shattenkirk's contract, based on especially how he started off his new season here. Really not off to a great start. It was a healthy scratch the other night. Personally, I don't see that happening at all. The other player that was mentioned in this piece here about the Rangers was Brady Shea. I don't see the Rangers trading Brady Shea at all. They just locked him up to a long-term deal. I think they kind of see him as the cornerstone to their blue line here long-term. Shattenkirk, the Leafs, I don't think would have any interest there. He is not good defensively. He is a pretty strong offensive defenseman, pretty good in the power play when he's playing well. He just had a pretty significant knee surgery last year, missed a lot of time. And right now his contract isn't looking the best considering his recent play and injuries. But I do think his preference would be to stay with the Rangers. He has a long-standing relationship with new head coach David Quinn. They've worked together in the past. They're very close friends as well. So I do think that they would probably both prefer Shattenkirk to stay in New York and make it work. And I don't see the Leafs taking on that kind of contract. He's making over $6 million. And if they're having that difficult of a time signing William Nylander, they're not going to want to bring in that kind of contract in return should it come to the point of being a trade. So I personally am going to dismiss this one and say I don't think it makes any sense for the Leafs and Rangers to make a deal here. But of course, again, I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Now, the last team that's been mentioned here is the Vancouver Canucks. Now, there's been a lot of silly trade rumors linked between the Canucks and the Maple Leafs here online over the last few weeks. And it's a little bit crazy. Some of these rumors even date back to the offseason or even towards the end of last year at the trade deadline, kind of linking Chris Tanev to the Leafs. And really, Tanev's a decent defenseman. He's had some injury problems. I don't see him really being the answer to what the Leafs want. Not to say that a deal between the Leafs and Canucks wouldn't happen in some capacity. I think the Canucks would probably love to have William Nylander. Like I mentioned, a lot of these teams clearly would like to get their hands on a young forward like him with all that potential, if the price is right, of course. Now, I just don't know that the Canucks would really have what the Leafs are looking for. I'm not sure that Tanev would get it done. It would have to be Tanev plus, I'm not sure what else. Maybe one of their younger prospects, maybe like a Gaudette or a Dahlin. I'm not sure they'd want to give up one of those guys, but then again, you're getting William Nylander. Hard to say. There's some speculation in this article that maybe they'd consider Ullovy. Well, I don't see the Leafs really wanting Ullovy. If they're going to move Nylander, they're going to want a defenseman that can help them today, not in a couple years' time. That wouldn't make sense for Toronto. I think the Leafs are in a situation where they're kind of all in here, really striving hard to win the Stanley Cup as soon as possible. So I don't think trading William Nylander for a prospect really makes any sense. There's been a lot of crazy rumors linking these two teams. Most of them don't make any sense to me at all. So those are the 8 trade proposals that the Toronto Sun article references here as that something that the Leafs should consider should things get to the point that William Nylander be traded. The other big thing I've seen a lot of talk about is an offer sheet for William Nylander, and I do think it's highly doubtful that actually takes place for a couple of key reasons. Number one, the compensation that would be required to give to Toronto should the player accept the offer sheet and the Leafs not match, which are 2 other key components here. I mean, for the money that he's rumored to be asking for, you're looking at giving up 3, maybe even 4 first-round draft picks for William Nylander. Now, if you were going to do a trade straight up, there's no way any team is going to pay that kind of price tag for William Nylander. So why would they do it through an offer sheet? That just simply does not make any sense. The offer sheet compensation is based on what the new contract works out to be with the offer sheet that's been accepted. And if it's the speculation is true that he's looking at, $8+ million and a team offer sheeted him on that and he accepted, the compensation would be outrageous. I just don't see it happening. It does not make any sense for any teams to do that. Secondly, the other key thing here that the other guys like Andrew Pillock has talked about is that he does have to accept it and that the Leafs have an opportunity to match or not anyhow. So I don't see William Nylander being offer sheeted and being putting the Leafs in a situation where they have to match it. And even if they were, they probably would, and they would figure it out later, even if it meant trading him or somebody else or whatever it was they had to do to kind of get their salary cap back in order. So that's all I got to say about the William Nylander situation. I do think that the most likely scenario is that he stays in Toronto and signs a new deal, and that something does get ironed out here eventually. But I want to hear your comments down below. Out of these 8 trade proposals from this article from the Toronto Sun, which one do you think is the most likely that the Leafs should look at should it come to that? If you're new to the channel here, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, hit the subscribe button. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We will catch you next time.